Hello, and welcome to the Afterlife. I'm Dre,
I'm Luke.
and tonight we'll be your hosts as we dive into tales of calls from the afterlife, otherwise known as phantom calls. So, Luke, tell us about these phantom calls. What have you learned in your research?
Yeah, so sometimes what can happen, and a lot of the times when, it's what you think is a phantom call and it's not, is numbers will actually get recycled after a while. And if you have the contact in your phone and you get a call from, a dead relative, it could actually just be from a recycled phone number, scam caller, or something along those lines. But
Right.
I picked out a couple stories that seemed pretty believable. I mean, they're on Reddit, so it's like, yeah, people could just make it up and have no record. There's no the
Way
thing
to
with Reddit is it's
confirm.
anonymous, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
someone could just be making stuff up, but nonetheless, they're pretty good stories. Sometimes you'll get text messages too. Neither of these include that. I think some of the comments, if we go into the comments section, people talk about text messages, but for the most part, it's calls. Whether you hear something when you pick up, as in a voice, it just depends. But for the most part, they're just calls, and you hear static. All right. So this is titled "Phone Calls from Beyond the Grave" by user Brennan Grain 85, posted 3 years ago. This is 100% true. If needed, I can probably find old posts on Facebook to provide to mods discussing it. Now on to my haunting experience. Before I continue, so right away, that kind of gives this a little more credibility. I don't know if any of the mods actually reached out to him to
Verified.
get this post, but that already gives it a little more credibility in my book. But continuing on, my family has always been somewhat sensitive to the paranormal. More than a few of us have had unexplained instances, but nothing like what kept happening a few years back. The year was 2000, and while this world survived Y2K, unfortunately my great-grandmother did not. A few months after her death, every few days we would receive phone calls from a number caller ID said was 000000000. Every time we picked up, it was constant white noise, like a TV channel that didn't come in right. The first few times we simply assumed something was going on with the phone lines and disregarded it. However, for whatever reason, we always picked up. Now, for those of you young ones on Reddit, the year 2000 was a different time. Cell phones were new and most people had landlines still. The worst part was the fact that almost all of the internet was dial-up, meaning a simple phone call could interrupt the song you've spent the past 5 hours downloading on LimeWire. And LimeWire was a website where you would pirate music, basically.
Right.
Before streaming services or streaming platforms took over. So obviously these white noise calls became an annoyance very quickly. Finally, my mother called the phone company to see if they could see where it was coming from. Well, once the phone company investigated the number, they discovered the calls were coming from a payphone. but just not any payphone. This payphone happened to be located right outside the cemetery where we had a few short months ago laid my granny to rest. Not only that, but the payphone was disconnected from use a couple of years before and wasn't even capable of making calls. This settles it for my family. We decided it was my granny, so every time the calls came, we simply spoke to her the same way we always had, and all was good. The calls continue for around 2 years at this point. I lived at the time in an area where tornadoes were rare, but when we had one, it tended to be incredibly damaging. One night, one came through the neighborhood, causing a lot of damage. However, my home was thankfully spared. Not long after it passed, the phone rang. This time, however, instead of white noise, my mother swears she hears her ask if everyone is okay. Mom reassures her we are all fine and everything is okay. After that, the calls stop, and we hope she's moved on to find her peace knowing we are okay. 10 years later, both my grandmother and grandfather have passed and have been buried alongside the rest of our family. My mom decided to move into her parents' home. At the time, I'm living with a boyfriend, and we decide to stop by the cemetery so I can introduce him to my beloved grandparents. Once I get back in the car, I check Facebook, and my mother had only 2 minutes before posted a photo of a phone showing the same 000 number and saying how after so many years she's finally hearing from heaven again. I call her frantic because I'm literally staring at their graves at that very moment. She received the call while my ex and I were standing there. My only assumption to this day was my family really didn't like my boyfriend then and was willing to call beyond the grave to make that fact known. That was the last call we ever received, but not our last experience. To this day, however, we still have the same landline number just in case they ever need to talk to us again.
Wow.
So we were just talking about this, like not a lot of people, last night, like not a lot of people have landlines anymore. But,
Yeah.
it's like annoying, expensive. Well, I don't know how expensive it is, but I'm assuming it's more pricey than just cell phones. But they like went out of their way. This was posted in like 2020. Like who had a landline in 2020? So they went out of their way to be able to maintain contact. So that's adding a little bit of credibility too for me.
Yeah, I mean, this one definitely, to me, seems credible. I mean, there's nothing too fantastical about it. It wasn't like, every time there's like a phone call, a mirror cracked or all clocks stopped working or something. Um, to me, this really just seemed like a nurturing presence, that just genuinely wanted to check up on their relative. It's kind of endearing. I completely thought it was gonna go a totally different way. I thought it was gonna be like posing as a grandma, and just, like something really scary was gonna happen. So not the way I expected at all, but nonetheless a really cool story.
Yeah,
What do you
you
rate
know,
that story? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you rate it?
I mean, it depends on if you're looking for a scary story. Because if it's a scary story, that's not scary at all. That's like maybe like a 1 out of 10, but it's like if you're looking for a hopeful or a heartfelt story, that's like 10 out of 10. Honestly, maybe
So
nine. Maybe I'll give it like 8 out of 10. If it was like a
so
video of the dude talking and telling the story, and you can like see his face, I'd give it a 10 out of 10.
so what would you rate it?
like Reddit and anonymous.
Yeah,
That
but
down.
what would you rate it um as like as far as like your enjoyment of the story, like how well you liked it? I don't want to say
Mm,
entertained because entertained isn't the right word in this context, but you know,
yeah.
basically.
I think maybe like 6 out of 10.
You know, I have to agree. I think that's probably like a solid like 6 to 7 out of 10. Good story.
Yeah, solid story. Not a lot of tension or like like what I look for is in an entertaining story, or yeah, like you said, not entertaining but just a story in general. I'd like to see a little more
Yeah,
tension,
yeah, it was
more
definitely like
character
compelling. I think
building,
that's yeah,
and
character building, character development. But I think it was really endearing though, and I think the fact that nothing super fantastical happened, um, in my eyes, that made it more realistic.
pretty good story. I got another one. This one's way older.
Yeah,
It's 9
let's dive
years
into that
ago,
one.
and I like really old videos and really old like posts and stuff. So this is pretty cool. Posted by World underscore unfolds. Phone call from the deceased. My dad passed away in 2008. After he passed, the business that comes along with that, taking personal time, etc., we began to handle his personal affairs. One of which being the cell phone plan my brother, my father, and I had shared for many years and was in his name. We called Verizon, had the number canceled, switched the plan into my name, and went about normally. A few days later, about a month since my dad's passing, I received a phone call from my dad's number. I was completely freaked out for about 2 seconds before rationale set in and I ignored the call. I figured it was a glitch of some sort, blamed it on a flaw in technology, and never really thought of it again. About 3 days later, another call comes in from my dad's old number. I ignore it, but a few minutes later, again, I get a voicemail from the call. I immediately check the voicemail, figuring it would be an explanation of why this person, who now has my dad's old number, is calling me, or a message from Verizon. It was neither. What it actually was a static-filled, barely audible voicemail, about 15 seconds long. I replayed it a few times and thought I heard some faint, dissonant voice, but I talked myself out of believing it. Again, a few days later, another call. This one I answered as soon as I could. I remember the event quite clearly. Sitting at the desk in my room of my mom's house on a hot summer day, just wasting some time on the internet. When I answer, I hear the same thing I heard on the voicemail, mostly static, mostly inaudible fuzz, but I could faintly hear some sort of voice far off until the call ends about 15 seconds in. Now I'm starting to really freak out. I tell everyone in my family, who all just assume I am traumatized and I am imagining things. So I call Verizon on speakerphone in front of my mom and brothers, and I ask about my dad's number. They tell me the number was disconnected based upon a request of the family, even giving me condolences for my loss. I hang up. Everyone sitting around the kitchen table rationalizes and discredits my story, but I know what I heard, and I have still not to this day ever concluded a possible normal explanation for what happened. My dad's old so oh sorry, that's just the TLDR. So um that's pretty much it with that one.
Wow, that one definitely feels like a little bit more almost malicious. I don't know. It's kind of the feel I get from, but obviously we don't know though because they never answered. Well, they did answer the phone, but they never really heard any like
Yeah, and
message
unlike
on it.
the
So
other posts, they're like not talking at all. Or like, dude, like the other posts, like they're saying the family's all like spiritually connected, and this guy's just kind of hanging up when they call when the possible dad calls, or yeah, maybe like a demon posing as his dad calls. But
or just like yeah, or like a really like sick prank call or something.
and the weird thing is, Verizon said it was disconnected, just like the other one where the payphone was disconnected. So that
Yeah,
adds a pretty spooky factor to it. I agree.
yeah, and like, did it say what year this took place in? 2008, right?
Right. So maybe like it could have been 2009 when he was getting the calls, but his dad passed in 2008.
2008.
So
So about
probably
2008 to
2008.
2009. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I don't know what kind of devices really were in use at the time, if you could really clone numbers. I mean, I don't know how hard it would have been to clone numbers to begin with back then. I mean,
I thought
nowadays,
like flip phones were still kind of the norm back then, weren't they?
yeah, flip phones are still kind of, I mean, a lot of people still had flip phones. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know what kind of technology would have been around to clone numbers then. I'm sure it wouldn't have been hard if you knew what you were doing. I just don't think it would have been as easy as it is in today. Um, so yeah, but this one definitely felt like a little bit more malicious, it kind of seemed like. But then again, you never know because there's no um actual like confrontation or them talking.
Yeah, one other thing to consider. Okay, this is 9 years ago, so that's he
Oh wait,
posted
this is
around.
'09. Yeah, yeah.
Uh, this post was from 9 years ago, so
Oh, okay.
uh, my point was, I think like 2014 was when this post came out. So between that and
Yeah.
'08 or '09 or whenever he was getting the calls, he didn't get any more calls after that. So that's kind of weird too. Like maybe Verizon kind of screwed up, and like when they got the call from the dude, they were like, "Oh shit, we actually didn't disable this." Because he would, yeah, I don't know. I would kind of think he'd get more calls after that, possibly.
Yeah, I don't know. Or maybe he just didn't repost or something, or who knows.
Well, with the other posts and the grandma, like the poster kind of worded it like the grandma like moved on, so maybe it's like, they only have a certain amount, like a time window before they can not really call you anymore, or they just don't care to call you anymore. Like
Yeah,
they're in heaven
they're like, I'm
chilling,
tired of
but
this. Yeah.
they're making the calls when they're in purgatory, or just when they're ghosts and they haven't moved on yet.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I'd say either way, it would be like really creepy. Um, Even if someone were to fake it, just to go through all that elaborate stuff, like that either way, I think would be pretty creepy. Um,
Yeah.
just like off, like I don't know. I'm just imagining that like someone that you knew, like that's not like someone that was your coworker or a classmate or someone you just kind of knew in passing. That's like your parent or your grandparent in the other case. So like to have someone like that, someone that you probably spoke to regularly, just to have them call you after you know them, I can't comprehend that. That's got to be like the most like gut wrenching like feeling ever.
Yeah, to be honest, I'd be pretty scared.
Yeah, like that
It
would
would
be like
be,
one of those
but
things.
on the same hand token, I'd answer the phone. Like even if I was scared, like you know what I mean? Like wouldn't you answer it? Like if a past relative, their phone number, showed up on your iPhone and like it's gut wrenching, but you also kind of want to know. And if they really are calling you, wouldn't you want wouldn't you want to like answer it?
I probably would. I think it'd really depend on like what relative it was. That would kind of determine my thought process. Because if it was like a distant cousin or something, then I would assume, okay, it's one of my other cousins calling from that deceased cousin's phone. That's what I would imagine. But yeah, I think I would answer the phone. I have a story here that I wanted to share that I found on Anomalin Anomalien, I think is how it's pronounced, .com.
This is
And
like one of the more popular stories, right? Like a
yeah, I
little more
think
like mainstream attention, not just like some obscure like Reddit post.
yeah, and they have this is a post that they made in 2020, and the article is Real Unexplained Phenomena, Phone Calls from the Dead. So yeah, they're kind of giving out what they called EVPs. I don't know why I said that like I'd never heard of EVPs. EVPs or electronic voice phenomena, um, which I guess could pertain or does pertain to phone calls. So this one also took place in 2008. This is a story here. Um, the real story of the enduring spirits and the power of love. So on September 12th, 2008, numerous lives came to a crashing halt as a Metrolink commuter train number 111, carrying 225 passengers, collided head-on with a Union Pacific freight train in Chatsworth, California. Actually, I think I remember this happening as a kid, which is kind of strange, like, just to be reading it. Um,
Well,
at the time, it seemed inconceivable that such disaster could happen, but it did. When the story hit TV screens across the US, it made its way into our hearts with sadness as the death toll began to rise among with the smoke from the twisted wreckage. When this when the final story concluded, the death toll stood at 25, with 135 being injured, many seriously injured. It took firefighters nearly a whole day to recover all of the bodies, and for those who waited for words of their loved ones, time would seem like an eternity. Charles Peck, age 49, of Salt Lake City, was one of the unfortunate passengers who perished in the Metrolink crash on September 12, 2008. The handsome father of two beautiful sons, CJ, 22, and Daniel, 18, was on his way to meet his fiancée, Andrea Katz, when the accident took place. Andrea was on her way to pick up Charles at the Moorpark station when she heard about the crash. The Peck family, who lived in the Los Angeles area, gathered together and waited for any good news about Charles. And as they waited, one by one, their phones began ringing. The caller ID showed it was coming from Charles's phone. His fiancée, son, brother, sister, and stepmother each received calls from Charles. When they answered the phone, they were each met with static and indistant sounds. His son CJ yelled into the phone, "Hang in there, they're coming to get you," and, quote, "We love you," end quote. When they tried calling him back, their calls went straight to voicemail, and they could not seem to reach Charles directly. Strangely enough, the calls kept coming in, and each time static was the only sound that they would hear on the other end of the line. Altogether, family members would receive 35 calls from Charles's phone number.
Damn.
Wow. Through Friday night into Saturday night, as the firefighters worked tirelessly to rescue those trapped inside of the wreckage, the family believed that Charles was alive, but trapped somewhere inside the debris. When firefighters heard that Andrea had received a call from Charles, they were hopeful and were able to trace the calls back to the first car of the train in which Peck was traveling in. While the family waited and held out hope, the phone calls ceased by 3:28 a.m. 1 hour later, Peck's body was recovered from the rubble. His phone, however, was never recovered. The
Whoa.
family was devastated. Words cannot describe the shock and pain they must have felt upon hearing the news. Later, coroner officials told the family that Charles had died instantly. He had been seated in the first passenger car when the train accident occurred. The Metrolink's engine car was so badly damaged, it ended up being shoved all the way back into the first passenger car. Later, when the family thought
Whoa.
back on the events that followed the crash, his son CJ said, quote, "I think it's a message from my dad, letting us know that he's not suffering," end quote. So the question waiting to be answered, and perhaps will never be, is, did Charles Peck make a phone call from the afterlife? There are so many who are skeptical about this story and others like it. The possibility of the dead reaching out to the living by means of cell phones or other communicating devices seem to be too far-fetched to fathom. But to those who believe that this is possible, and for those who have experienced this extraordinary phenomenon at first hand, no amount of contradiction or attempts to discredit it will change their minds. This story, as devastating as it is, also gives hope to many advocates of the afterlife, researchers in the field of science, religion, and the paranormal. You might be asking yourself, how can a story like this give so many hope? Unfortunately, while Charles Peck passed away and will obviously be remembered for many reasons by his family and friends, this amazing man will also be recalled for his incredible determination after death. He achieved the unimaginable. He managed to reach beyond the fabric of time and space.
Oh,
sliced through it with such resolve, and proved to his family that he was still living, albeit in a spiritual form, and that his love for them endured even after his physical death. Wow.
so
So that's my first time reading that. That was crazy. I've never heard that. Well, I that sounded vaguely familiar, and I do remember that train crash happening, if it's the right one I'm thinking of. Um, and the story did kind of ring a bell. I just didn't know about the death toll or how many missed call or not missed calls, but how many calls they all received from him.
do you think there's any significance to you know how it like said the phone call stopped at 3:28 a.m., like the witching hour, like about
Yeah.
halfway through the witching hour?
Uh-huh.
Like, do you think there's any significance to that?
Well, I mean, they always say spirits are most active um between the hours of 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. And usually the witching hour, like you said, is at 3 in the morning. Some people kind of say, oh, the witching hour is from like 12 to 3. Or some people say it's 3 on, or it's just 3 o'clock. But
Yeah, I
yeah, to
thought it
answer your
was like 3 to
question,
4.
yeah, I think it's 3 to 4. I think it kind of depends on, who you're talking to. But
Okay,
um,
interesting.
I think like my theory is like that is pretty significant that they stopped around that time. That just kind of like was a little like chilling that it stopped around that time. Um, but yeah, no, I truly think that is significant to this story. Why at 3:28 a.m.? I think that's what I said is 3:28. Um, I'm not sure. Maybe his spirit that was like he had given off his last burst of energy. Um, I don't know. I don't think we'll ever really know. But that was my first time reading that story, so that was pretty intense. And not to say that the other stories don't have any significance or not to discredit the previous stories, but I think this story has a little bit more significance. Um,
Yeah, it's like way more credible just because it's like they're using the dude's actual name. They had like
exactly.
all calls going on. They had like the fire department involved.
Yeah, exactly. So
They
it's
literally like traced
yeah, like
the calls rather.
that was crazy. Now I know it's not um I know it's not a phone call. If I can pull it up real quick. Here we go. There's another short story here, and in the same article, and this is after the death of wife Sadie at 69 years old. Frank Jones, at 59, of Blackpool, England, felt anxious about stepping into his own home because he started receiving missed calls on his cell phone. Okay, maybe this is a phone call thing. Because he started receiving missed calls on his cell phone. That in itself was not strange, but what was odd was that the caller ID showed the calls were coming from his own landline, home phone, while nobody was there. With much consideration
Whoa.
and dread,
That would be pretty terrifying to get a call from your
That
cell,
yeah.
basically.
Yeah, so it's like his home phone is calling in, but that is pretty terrifying. Um, with much consideration and dread, Frank entered his home and caught the familiar scent of his wife's perfume and cigarette smoke in the air. Apparently, this was not the first time Frank had a run-in with the ghostly world. In previous years, his home was invaded by poltergeist activity and had to be exorcised when it was discovered that a spirit dubbed, quote, "the thing," end quote, was causing mayhem in the home. Soon after his soon after his Jones wife and son Stephen passed away, his home became the epicenter of activity once more. One night as he lay in bed and a hazy shadow One night as he laid in bed, a hazy shadow moved across the room, sending Frank into panic. He was paralyzed with fear and unable to cry out. There were also other odd occurrences and the distant echo of footsteps going up the stairs, which was quite unsettling. And just as he thought things could not get any stranger, Frank's daughter, Maureen, who was 31 years old, began receiving cryptic text messages on her new mobile phone from a mystery phone with no ID. Both Frank and his daughter had their doubts at first, but then later began suspecting it might be his late wife because of the nature of the messages themselves. Frank recalled how when Sadie was alive, she was very excited about her new mobile phone that she had purchased. She had begun working on the functions and managed to learn how to text on the phone, but she could never quite figure out how to add spaces between words. So in her usual messages, the words would run together, looking like one long word. This often amused Frank and his daughter Maureen, who mentioned she had to learn how to put spaces between the words. But Sadie would just grin. That didn't seem to bother her one bit. The phone became very important to Sadie, and she never went anywhere without it. In fact, after she died of a heart attack, a devastated Frank lovingly laid the phone in her casket and told her she would be needing it, then buried his beloved wife with her phone, never expecting the unexpected. So when Maureen showed up at her father's house and checked her phone, she noticed more messages and strange words that ran together, along with unknown information that was only known to the family. So that was like personal stuff that no one else would know. They put two and two together and realized that Sadie had figured out how to contact the family from beyond. The messages ceased abruptly after the phone was damaged. When Maureen told her father about it, they were both saddened, but while they were discussing what happened, the landline in Frank's house immediately started ringing. Maureen answered it, and what she heard was a distant woman's voice saying, quote, "goodbye," end quote. The line went dead. Frank at last had his final farewell to his wife. After the calls ceased, both the memories of Sadie and those SMS messages would forever stay with them. So that's that story. Um,
Wow.
that one's definitely a little bit more toned down from the previous one. This
Are
one
there like
lady
any
sadly
screenshots of
died.
the?
But
Oh, sorry.
go
I
ahead.
was wondering if there's like any screenshots of the uh, cryptic like
Oh, the
text
messages.
messages.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping she would get into what she meant by the cryptic messages. Like, kind of what was said. Um, I was kind of hoping she would kind of get into that, but sadly she didn't. But that would. So I hope you enjoyed these stories of tales or calls from beyond the grave. If you have any personal stories that this has happened to you or someone you know, go ahead and drop a comment and tell us what happened. Um, but with that, do you have anything you'd like to add, Luke?
Uh, yeah, just again, like how it's pretty interesting that these people that have passed on choose to communicate through phones. Like, I don't know if it's easier for them because it's like energy or what goes into that, but we should do an episode on this too. So look out for this, guys. Like an episode on people that have passed on, but like appear in your dreams. Um,
I've had
Dreams
a
I
few of
find
those,
pretty
so yeah.
interesting. I just looked into this case of someone that was born blind, or not born blind, but they were pretty much blind from the get go because they were born prematurely, and then they were, or she was, given too much oxygen, and she lost her
Mm-hmm.
ability to see.
Hmm.
And throughout her life, as she dreamed, so with blind people, like when they dream, they can hear and feel like that. So their hearing and feeling sensations are what they dream about, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
But she had an NDE. She was in a car accident, and she was able to see in the near-death experience, like after her heart stopped for a few minutes.
Hmm.
So I think maybe dreams are like, before I heard that, I used to think maybe dreams are like in a different reality, but I'm still open to the idea that like uh loved ones that have passed can appear in your dreams and they intentionally do that. So yeah, that would be a pretty cool episode too. That kind of relates to this topic.
Yeah, definitely. I do like what you're saying. I think, well, I mean, even in that article, I was kind of going over, they kind of classified this under EVPs. So, I mean, I guess that makes sense, you know, using like the energy to kind of like make a sound or make a phone call. Um, Again, I don't know why, but that just seems so much more eerie to me. Um, than if someone I knew passed away and like I heard like, a knock on the door or, a glass falling over in front of me. I would attribute that to, that person, but I don't know. I think that's just for me personally, I think that's just the feeling of someone else calling or the thought of, potentially someone else calling from like your loved one's number. This is like an intrusion. So at least from my perspective, I think I would kind of be really taken back.
Yes.
Whereas if I were to, see a glass fall over, or maybe like you can hear a phantom voice that sounded like someone, I think I would be like way more like calm and receptive to that.
Do you
But
think that's like maybe like we kind of view phones as like technological, like materialist versus like we don't really. The thing is, well, me personally, I have no idea how phones work at all. I just think of
Mhm.
like a bunch of really smart people and stuff, but I kind of know how gravity works. And if this like
Right.
chair on my deck were to like flip over, I'd be like,
Mhm.
what? That's definitely a ghost. Whereas with the phone, it's like there's always gonna be that doubt, like, oh, this could be like a glitch or someone pulling a prank, someone that just like has too much time on their hands.
Yeah. For yeah, I think you're right. I mean, with technology, there's always the risk, no matter how secure anything is, it always poses the risk of someone being able to like hack in and manipulate that technology. So I think maybe like with phones, that's why it's like, it can be kind of like written off in some cases. Now, in the case with Charles Peck, I think that's a little bit different because I mean, it wasn't like just one call. It was like, 35 calls and they kept hearing him or, just static. And what was really interesting about that story is it was that his phone was never recovered. So it's like, what happened to his phone? Did his phone melt? Was it lost? Did it go, flying out of the train? Upon impact? Was it crushed? Did he lose it, at the train station, beforehand? And if so, if that were the case and he lost it beforehand and someone got a hold of his phone, why would they call all of his relatives? Not once, not twice, but like several times.
Right. And
So
even
for
the
me, that's just,
phone booth thing, like it was literally disconnected.
yeah,
You know, in a
exactly.
food
So I think,
store. It
yeah, so I
must
think
be
there's
easier for them to communicate through phones for whatever reason.
yeah, it's probably just the use of the electricity, but again, I think when there's room for something to be manipulated, like with technology, I think there definitely comes a lot more criticism, or you have to be more like
Yeah,
aware of
that's
maybe this
definitely a
isn't
problem.
paranormal. I mean, it's like I think it just goes back to that old saying, like seeing is believing. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if you were to see, something move right before your eyes, or like a glass slide across the counter and then fall, you're going to be way more receptive to that than, a phantom call, you know, because there's always that one thought maybe it's, just a prank or something.
Yeah, and maybe it's not even easier for them, but they actually put that into consideration. Like they don't want to scare you. They want you to be able to hold on to like the materialist philosophy that you have if you choose. And the best way to do that is to call you rather than like flipping over a chair. Whereas like with the chair flipping, it's like there's like
That would
no
be
doubt.
pretty scary.
It's like, oh,
Yeah.
that's definitely a ghost. Like I'm scared.
Yeah.
Like a
Yeah,
phone, like
exactly.
at
Like,
least you have like an like a reasonable cause to not believe.
yeah, 100%. Yeah. And plus, I mean, there's no real way to attribute, okay, that was that one person, unless it was like,
That's a good point.
oh,
Too.
this was, yeah, unless it was like, oh, this is, John's favorite, like, wine glass. It just fell off the shelf. That must have been him. So,
Yeah, they can do that. There's like synchronicities, maybe some sort of synchronicity. Like I can't really think of an example off the top, and maybe that's another reason why they choose to call, like it might be hard for them to think like of a way to get the message through that it's them and not some
Yeah.
human or malicious entity. It's like them.
Or just like something you could just write off, like, oh, that was just an earthquake or something. Just a gust of wind. Yeah, you know what? I like that analogy. I mean, because you gotta take into consideration like ghosts are people too. So, you know, it's like, of course, like, when they die, it's not like they're gonna have all the answers, have it all together, so, I could totally see like a ghost just being like, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't even consider that idea. That'd be me as a ghost. So,
Yeah, like I think it's safe to talk about this on the pod because we were thinking about this. Like if you were to have, like pass, I was like, we were talking about this on the phone a few months back. I was like, yeah, you should just like tip over my like tripod, and then oh no, it's you.
oh yeah.
And we were like, well, maybe there's like a demon listening to this because I was like saying like, dude, don't just like manifest. Like that would be spooky. Like that would scare
Oh
me.
yeah, that's right.
It's the thought
Yeah,
of
I
like
forgot I said that.
demon like pretending to be you would be like kind of too much. So
Yeah,
yeah, we
I
thought we'd just like talk about it in person or maybe like
yeah,
some sort of letter or something, but and
if
have
that
the letter
happened,
protected and then have some sort of way to communicate
but
if you were to like.
yeah, just like some like special seal or something. I think what I would do, um, I would just I would try to come back for one last pod.
Dude, that would be sick, bro. I'd
Yeah,
title it
it's just groundbreaking.
Podcast with the Ghost.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed
And it would
this week's
really be
episode
the
of
afterlife.
Yeah, exactly. Like literally the afterlife. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode of the Afterlife, Phantom Calls or Calls from Beyond the Grave. Again, if you guys have any stories along this topic or any stories or encounters with the paranormal at all, please drop a comment below. Please remember to like and subscribe, and leaving a comment helps. Even if you don't like the video, that's okay. Let us know why. Or maybe you don't believe in ghosts. Go ahead and drop a comment. But we are trying to make a goal of see how many we can get before 2024, and that's just around the corner. So if you guys could please find it in your hearts just to subscribe and share this video, we'd be eternally grateful. But with that being said, I've been your host, Dre.
And I've been Luke.
He's also been a host. And as always, we'll see you on the other side.